Welcome to Platform Diaries with Shane Williams, where each fortnight you'll hear the stories of industry veterans and learn the secrets to sustainably amplifying value from your software platform investments.
Have you ever paused to reflect on how difficult it must be to innovate on platforms in regulated industries? Or perhaps you work in a maturing digital startup and you're trying to navigate the growing pains of achieving scale in new markets. In today's episode, we tackle these topics head on. Welcome to Platform Diaries, I'm your host Shane Williams. My guest today is Rolf Krolke, Head of Technology Services at investigative analysis and intelligence software vendor NoOps. We discuss managing the growing pains of a maturing digital business, navigating the engineering culture in regulated markets, and deciding when to build or buy platforms. But before we get into the interview, I'd like to ask a favour. You see, more than 70% of our audience listens to this podcast on the Apple platform. For those of you who do, could I ask you to please take a moment to give Platform Diaries a 5-star review? You'd really be helping us to increase our reach and provide insights to more professionals just like you. So go ahead and hit pause. I'll be right here when you get back. So Rolf, thanks for joining me on Platform Diaries.
Thanks, Shane. Great to be here.
Mate, I want to dive straight in and ask you to give our listeners a little bit of a, insight into who you are and what you do. So if you don't mind, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your career journey and what it is that you do now.
No, absolutely. So I started many years ago after leaving uni in the tech world. So I've spent time at Dell, Microsoft, Amazon. I'm now currently at NoOps, where I look after the technology service group globally, which consists of pre-sales, delivery, support, cloud operations, corporate IT, and security.
Awesome. And maybe you should tell us a little bit about what NoOps is and what you do.
Absolutely. So NoOps specializes in transforming massive amounts of messy data. So we are the masters of unstructured data. Anything from email, social media, anything human generated, we put it into a flat format and make it searchable.
Awesome. And I think I read on the website that you've kind of then gone sort of tangentially around not just managing unstructured data, but sort of smells like in the security space.
Yeah, definitely. We've got a number of different products that cover digital forensic investigations, legal review, and then right down to endpoints. So with our adaptive security and collections platforms.
Yeah, right. And so how long did you say you've been at NoOps?
So I've been at NoOps coming up to 4 years.
Yeah, right. And I imagine the company's been around a lot longer than that. So you've moved into a role, likely inherited whatever was there at the time, good, bad, or indifferent. And so I'd love to just dive into a little bit about that. And the reason, just for the benefit of the people listening, the reason I want to get there is I've been working with the maturing tech startups for the best part of the last few years. And what I tend to see is a pattern of, you know, the business has this sort of hyper-growth trajectory and they're doing really well and a lot of autonomous teams delivering great stuff. And you get to this tipping point, there's kind of this growing pains, if you like, as the business matures that says, you know what, autonomy is great and we need to maintain that. We need to maintain the culture, but we also need to start to get a little bit more mature around standardizing some things. And we need to focus our engineering effort where it matters most, less so about just building software for the sake of it and more so about building the right things. And so a lot of my conversations I have with execs is, well, what if we were to focus your engineering effort on revenue generating new products that you can take to market to tackle new problems rather than trying to solve back office problems that are solved by, you know, commodity products off the shelf. And so with that context, I'd love to get a bit of a sense of, you know, what was it you inherited when you joined and what is your vision? Where are you taking it? And you know.
Yeah, great. So when I joined NoOps is an Australian company. It's 22 years old, I believe. When I joined, it was still very much in that startup mentality. So there's lots of different systems, people working on lots of different projects. And my role is really to start to bring that together because it's incredibly difficult to manage multiple different sets of platforms, subscriptions, and then adding all the security, compliance. How do you operate as an enterprise grade company? So it really started to look at, well, what are we using? So it was a full audit of the platforms And then how do we start to standardize on, for instance, we're going to use the Atlassian platform in engineering. We're going to use the ServiceNow platform in support. We've got Salesforce and NetSuite at the front end. Okay, let's bring those together and let's start turning off all the other systems that we don't need. And then starting to look at, well, how do we deliver to our customers? And as Nuix is moving into, as number of SaaS platforms, is starting to look at, well, how does the back end work? And there's always this concept of, I think, especially in that startup or the maturing areas, you throw people at the problem. So the more people that you get, yep, I've got an issue, let's go. Rather than looking at it really, how do you develop your way out of the solution or the situation?
That's an interesting insight, taking let's call it market-driven perspective on the importance of security over features. And I'd love to, if you don't mind, explore that a little further. Could you talk to us about perhaps that in a little bit more detail, particularly around winning the hearts and minds of the team and how you perhaps take your product teams from focusing on feature to focusing on security?
Definitely. So I think one of the things that we get asked a lot from customers is, show me your vulnerability reports. Here is a 500 question security document to fill in around, all different aspects of how the platform works. Can you show us your latest code scans? What is this code scanning platform? What's your patch management cycles and so on? So we get asked on a daily basis these questions. So feeding that, you're working with product and engineering and getting them to understand and actually see what customers are asking. So we're not doing this because we want to add more layers of red tape and so on top of everything that we do. This is actually a market-driven demand. And as we've shared this information and really brought the product and engineering teams on the journey and exposing them to what customers are asking, these sorts of changes become much, much easier to implement. And people then move to a security first mindset. I was even on a call yesterday with a group of the engineering team to solve a problem. And everyone was focused around, yes, we could do that, but that's not very secure. So we need to do it in a more secure way. So that is really sort of resonating through the organization.
And is that a journey, or did it kind of just click overnight, do you think?
No, it's been a journey. It doesn't, unfortunately, I'd love just to click overnight, it'd make my job much easier. But it has been a journey, lots of understanding, lots of explaining that needs to happen. But also, I think as part of our compliance framework that we have to do, and sending out notifications and making people do the IT security training and getting them to understand everything that they do can have a flow-on impact has really changed the way people are operating.
Yeah, right. And what I think is interesting is it sounds very much like, and maybe I'm generalizing here, but it sounds like your customers are au fait technologists, and that might be unfair, but I mean, I imagine if you're talking, typical customer might be using CRM software and whatnot, they're probably not asking for vulnerability reports. So do you think that the level of focus you guys have got is largely based on the types of customers that you have?
It is. It's the types of customers and types of products that we create and what they're used for. So our products are used across law enforcement, government, regulators, corporates, finance, everything. And it is really around handling some really sensitive data. So if they're doing, law enforcement is investigating people smuggling or corruption or so on, they don't want that data to leak out. If you've got law firms using our platforms to prepare matters to go to court for prosecution or litigation or so on, that data is ultra sensitive. So they require us to be on top of our game from a security and vulnerability perspective.
Yeah, right. And so I think what I'm hearing is a really interesting perspective. I guess it's somewhat tangent to what we're normally talking about, which is that you're largely building a platform over the top of platforms, perhaps, standing on the shoulders of giants, so to speak, which I think is something we haven't talked about on the podcast before. I wouldn't mind going there a little bit if you don't mind.
Yeah, definitely. And we do. So the unique thing about Nuix and the great thing about Nuix is everything revolves around our processing engine. There's 20 plus year old technology that essentially can suck in over 1,000 different file types, open it up, index it, and then put it into a searchable structure. So that underpins, and then we build platforms to sit on top of it. So we've got our Nuix Investigate product, which is the digital forensics tool. That sits on top of the engine, on top of what the engine does. And then you look at our Discover platform, which is our legal review. Again, it uses everything that comes out of the engine and allows people different insights into the data. And then we look at some of our collection tools that streams data into the engine. So everything that we do is built around the Nuix engine.
Yeah, right. And then underneath that Nuix engine, you talked earlier about CRM and ERP and a few other service management platforms and so forth. Would it be fair to say then that this sort of focus of the organisation, tell me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like the strategy is this scaling through standardization and automation, but underpinned by a focus on, not building what you oughtn't and utilizing PaaS. Is that fair?
Yeah, so we're definitely on that journey. And it's been interesting for us because traditionally Nuix was all on-prem in a disconnected network or in a dark room, as some people would say. And as the importance of what our software does has moved up the stack, I guess within the different organizations we work with, it's now onto the corporate network. And now there's obviously the drive to run it in the cloud. So as we do that, it's really necessary that we standardize the back end so that it is an extensible platform, but also we're not spending all of our time essentially at the back end operations piece. We are really at the front end, listening to what customers are wanting to do and essentially building for the future.
And so what I talked about earlier about the conversations I've been having around focusing engineering effort on product and revenue generating activity versus the back office, is that fair that I guess suggests that you guys are following a similar approach?
Absolutely. Yeah, we are very closely listening to our customers and listening to the market, and the engineering effort is very much focused on revenue generating activities.
Could you talk to me a little bit about how you've set up your, let's call it engineering practice, in terms of, let's just say, what percentage of your engineering capacity would be focused on maintaining the PaaS platforms versus the ones that you're selling?
Yeah, definitely. So the way we've actually set it up is engineering are completely development focused, and then we have a cloud operations team that essentially runs the platforms. So engineering hand over their finished product, and then the operations team take it and then push that into production and essentially manage it. And what we are working towards is the concept I refer to as NoOps. So we want everything automated. We want to have application performance management, observability running so that we can do exception management, have really good code pipelines so it can pass all the tests and deploy automatically as needed. And essentially using the operations team then to look at the next cool set of technologies or better ways of doing things, and then feeding that back into engineering and helping with the overall continuous innovation of the platform.
And then for your, I guess, PaaS platforms, do you have internal teams running them, or does operations kind of do first level support and utilize partners?
So we have a support team that will do the first level support, and then we'll either head off to operations or into engineering. So we don't use partners from a support perspective internally. We use partners more from a sales, distribution and delivery perspective.
Right. And so if I was to summarize a lot of the, we got pseudo-technical there for a second. For the non-technical audience, it would be a focus on automation to effectively keep the lights on so that the humans can focus on bringing new products to market. Is that fair?
Exactly. And I think the other key bit there as well is it reduces your overall costs of running, because costs of running, if you throw more people in the back end, can very quickly creep up, and then you have a problem.
So over the course of the time you've been there, what does that look like in terms of, as you say, cost? Do you kind of, I make a saving and I reinvest that, or do I make a saving and bank it? How does that land?
Look, I think it depends on what you want to do. I mean, we've done a lot of cost savings, and reinvestment is probably the big focus for us right now. But it really depends on the landscape, and that's a discussion that you have with CFOs quite regularly around. So, what would you like me to do, or where do we need to be, or what's the change in direction from a finance perspective, so that we can build that into the operational perspective.
Awesome. And so, one of the other things you talked about earlier was this sort of regulated industries that you operate in, and the heavy focus on I guess, being able to produce reporting and so forth that shows you're compliant. How does that, not just, we've talked about culture, but how does it influence sort of architecture and ways of working and making decisions and those sorts of things?
It really, again, underpins everything that we do, because for any organization that wants to sell their platform in the cloud, you have to be certified and you have to meet the industry certification. So Nuix is, ISO 27001 certified, and we just got 27017 and 18 we added to our list. We've been assessed to IRAP protected in Australia to host government data. We've got the APRA CPS 234 assessment, and then we're currently walking towards getting FedRAMP assessed as well. And there's thousands of controls involved in all of these that cover the whole way that the organization works. But it's key from an engineering perspective because they have to build to this standard. So as we think about new products, I essentially, because I look after security, we hand engineering a build of materials. You can build whatever you want. It must comply with all of these different areas. And this is the software stack that we are using to implement security.
It must take a unique set of individuals who can be innovative and creative inside such a, I guess, inflexible set of rules, right?
It is, and there's lots of negotiation. As I always say, I'm always up to change. If something's not working, we'll look at something else. But it is really interesting when you've got people that just love to go and build stuff, and now you've essentially given them guardrails. But what has been helpful is, as we talk a lot internally around the different security assurance programs that we run and that we meet, the culture is everyone understands that. And they know that if we want to do business, you want to do more business in the cloud, you must adhere to these standards. So it's really becoming part of the DNA.
Yeah, right. I was interested in ways of working, particularly when you talked about, we had these certifications and now we've added more. Does that manifest in, yes, we have a backlog of things we want to work on, but now we need to add in new, let's call it cards, into the backlog for things that need to be changed to meet these new certifications? Or how does that work out for the teams?
Yes, no, we've done. So a great example is we have essentially done a whole lot of change in our platform to be FIPS 140-2 compliant. So that's a big heavy lift because that's to meet the US federal government requirements. So that was a real rethink because, again, that to work in a FIPS mode, as they call it, requires you must meet this criteria and you must work within these boundaries, and this is the outcome and this is how it will be assessed. So it's very stringent. So
in simple terms, do you just look at all the different standards and go, which one's most stringent? That's what we're building to? Is that how it kind of comes apart?
We actually look at what are the markets that we want to play in, and then what is the certifications that we need to do that, and then we operate around that. Or what are our customers asking for?
So I mentioned earlier, I describe some of the work that I do with organizations as, let's call it maturing startup growing pains. And that concept of, what got us here won't get us there, and what needs to change in order to be able to enable scale. And you were talking about this sort of shift to standardization and automation. Does that have a significant impact on your organization and the engineering community?
Look, it certainly does. I mean, when I first joined Nuix, different products were built at different speeds, and it was I guess the right way would be it was unpredictable. This product would release on this time, another product might release every 6 months. It was all a little bit over the place. So Nuix implemented, I guess, program increments. So we went to a 3-month release cycle with a forward-looking roadmap. So we could actually sit down. We know what is being built. The technical community within Nuix knew that a new release was coming out at this time, at this quarter. This is what would be in it. And we were able to really get into roadmap discussions with customers, talking around expected delivery dates. Again, that was a really big change because it's gone from, what's the cool stuff that we're going to work on today? Or I'm really interested in this widget to, okay, this is the program we've got for the next 13 weeks, go.
So Rolf, I might circle back to one of the topics we talked about earlier, and that was in your early days joining the organisation and sort of getting your head around the tech landscape. And you mentioned you've got a number of off-the-shelf platforms in, I think you mentioned Salesforce, NetSuite, ServiceNow, and a couple others. Could you give us a bit of insight into, with your vision for NoOps, and having your engineering community focused on what you do in terms of customer value. Could you talk to us about what the original landscape looked like? Did you bring some platforms in, take some out? And how has that morphed over your tenure from where it was to where it is now?
Look, that's a really good question. When I came in, we didn't do cloud. We were sort of just dabbling in that and so on. So we removed a number of platforms out of it to simplify. We've done a big program last year of actually connecting platforms, and we continue that this year. So you can now flow from Salesforce all the way through ServiceNow into Jira, so you can trace the life cycle of a customer, which is really important. But we've also looked at what do we standardize on. So we've built on AWS, and that's really our standard platform for anything cloud at this point in time. And we utilize a number of their services. When we first started, we just used EC2 and S3 and EBS like everyone else with VPC. But as Amazon continues to release new services, we continue to evolve the product. What we are doing is looking at what other services can we utilize. And the great thing about that is essentially we continue to outsource some of that back-end operations to Amazon. So if you're getting into managed databases, that means that someone else is looking after the database for you, or you're making sure is that the data quality is okay. And so that's really what we are looking for from a platform perspective, and how we are going to drive to the NoOps piece. I think the other piece as well is really important, is around actually what's going on inside your platform. And that's where the likes of Splunk comes in handy for us, and we're in the process of looking at what is the right observability tool that we want to use, and what's going to give us the insights into what's happening, but also allow us to, I guess, get to that point of automating the self-healing piece. How can we feed data in and then go, right, if this happens, then do this, so that a human doesn't need to touch it?
I think that's interesting. If I was to sort of paraphrase my understanding of the product that you build, it would be, we have a bunch of data that we can use to mine and generate insight, and yet you're choosing to buy a product off the shelf that allows you to mine the data of the health of the systems that sit behind it and generate vision, if you like. Was there ever a debate, or would you have ever considered we should just build our own?
Yes, we did look at that, but it was the old build or buy trade-off, right? And we want to build for customers to generate revenue. We don't want to build for internal problems. So it was easy to go out and buy something off the shelf, essentially. And I think there comes with that credibility around it as well. When I talk to customers, say, we use Splunk as our SIEM platform, they're like, oh, okay, cool, right, great. Next.
Right.
Whereas if you walked into a law enforcement organization, Nuix would be their standard for data processing.
And does the fact that you're using a product off the shelf, does it lend itself favorably towards the audit requirements, when you can go, I didn't build this myself, you don't need to audit it?
Yeah, it does. It becomes very, very easy. What would you like? The Splunk report? We push a button, there you go.
So I always put this question to guests, and I'd love you to ponder it for us, which is the top 3 tips is generally where I go with this. Now I'm trying to work out the top 3 tips for organizations who are thinking about, where do I invest my human capital in terms of, putting it into revenue generating product, or putting it into maintaining and building commodity, software, if you like. We've talked about culture, we've talked about vision, we've talked about customer demand and a few other things. What would be the 3 tips for CIOs who are looking at build versus buy, do you think?
That is an interesting question. I think it all comes down to where you are in the maturity cycle, what your strategy is, because you may take a build approach to a buy approach depending on the outcome. You may choose to build because you can see, not only can I use that internally, but that's a commodity I can sell. And if you don't have time, then you go and buy. I'd also look at what is the ongoing operational cost as well. Am I going to be constantly having to update this, or do I make that someone else's problem and I can focus on building essentially customer-facing solutions that's going to bring in revenue?
So if we broke that down, it would be, are you building this for speed? Can it become a commercial offering? Or is it going to distract me from my core purpose?
Exactly.
All right. Good questions for people to ask if they're considering that debate. Mate, thanks for spending the time. If people do want to reach out, either to learn a little bit more about Nuix or to just pick your brain on this journey of, standardization, automation, and this concept of NoOps, how should they get in touch?
I think best way is through LinkedIn. It's the easiest way to get hold of me.
Rolf, thanks again. I'll make sure that your LinkedIn is in the show notes, so if people want to reach out, they can. Appreciate your time and your insights, and we'll look forward to talking again soon.
Excellent. Thanks, Shane.
You've been listening to Platform Diaries with Shane Williams. For more information or to contact Shane, please visit shanewilliams.com.au. Until next time, thanks for listening.